everyone, and welcome back to Always Watching. And we only have one more episode left. And of course, Logan's funeral was riddled with chaos. And for me, this was basically Kendall's coronation. He will be the successor. That's basically where the series is headed. Prior to this funeral, they all seemed like they were on even footing. Each one of them still had kind of a fighting chance. And to be honest, it was Roman's battle to lose, right? He had to connect with the new president. He was about to shine at his father's funeral. And this eulogy was supposed to crown him, especially after, their uncle's horrible, attack on their dad. This was it. This was the moment. And Roman essentially shit the bed, right? He fumbled the ball. His mistake was that he looked weak, right? He looked like a son mourning his father. And in this room full of very, very powerful, evil people, that's just not a look that you wanna have. And I felt so bad for Roman at the end, right? They were roasting him on the internet. They were just kind of going in on him, and he didn't really deserve all that. And I honestly don't see how it can't be Ken at this point. And he's literally turning into his dad, right? We don't have much backstory in the show, but from what we've seen, he's becoming very Logan-y. And, the first sign of that was when he started asking for custody of his kids. The way that he talked to his ex-wife, I understand that he was a bit upset, but given the climate and given the situation, I didn't really blame her for wanting to leave the city. And the way he was talking to her, we know that Logan institutionalized one of his wives and essentially paid off the other, it seems, because we never hear about Kendall, Shiv's, and Roman's mom. She just seems to pretend like they don't exist. And it seems like Kendall is preparing to kind of take from his father's playbook. And so before we get into it, I thought this funeral was very well shot. And I like the choreography of this episode, right? The way they brought in the casket, the politics of seating, right? Having the family close up and everybody else kind of at the back. And one of my favorite scenes was Logan's ex-wives and mistresses just in the middle, right? Kind of pulling each other aside and just, having a seat at the table. And there were two groups of people at this funeral. People actually grieving Logan, like Colin and Roman, and people who were just kind of jealous of those who were able to get a seat closer to the front row, right? People looking out for themselves, people trying to network, right? People like Greg, essentially, Greg, as if he was near the casket at all. That part just tripped me out. Before the funeral, as I've said, everybody was on even footing. The episode starts off with each sibling kind of in their little corner, trying to figure out where they should go from here. And it's such a contrast to when their father died, when they were so close and they were so in it together. And now they're just trying to figure out ways to rip each other apart. And Shiv is still coordinating with Lukas about how to secure this takeover. And she manages to convince him to release these kind of shady numbers. And, it works. There's more important things to do. It seems like this country is falling apart. There are riots in different cities across America. People have more important things to cover than this takeover at the moment. So, best do it now. So she also gives him the bright idea of maybe selecting an American CEO to kind of appeal to this new president. And, he kind of dismisses it, right? He's like, you're very inexperienced. And that was his way of saying, you're very entitled for asking that question. And I actually think her idea was good, but it was never going to be her. She gave him a really good idea that he's fully going to use against her. And any hope that she had kind of came and went by the way she talked to Jared. The way Lukas was looking at her, you could tell she was disgusted. She couldn't even pretend to like this man. That was it for Shiv. And Shiv finally tells her family that she's pregnant. And I like their reaction because I was wondering why no one noticed that she was pregnant. Her mother noticed right away. And Roman was like, I thought you were eating your feelings away. That makes sense. right? And all the nasty jokes that came with it. But like, I was wondering when they would comment. The fact that they were questioning the paternity of the child, like, wow, like these guys have no respect. But the vibe of the car, if anybody seemed kind of potentially unhinged, it was Kendall. Actually, he had the stress from his ex-wife. Like, he didn't seem too good. Whereas Roman was cracking jokes, like he was chilling. So I didn't really see that coming, right? The fact that he started the episode like, rhyming, and then he ended, crying, right? Like he was telling jokes and then he just choked. Like, it was just unbelievable. In terms of her relationship with Tom, it's pretty much up in the air. He's dealing with a lot right now. He doesn't want to go. What did they say? Like, they don't want to go to The Hague for war crimes. Like, they basically called an election and they have to pray that it all works out. Because if it doesn't, they look like morons. And the fact that Tom didn't even take this networking opportunity to go to this funeral means he knows that his outcome is based on what he does in the office that day, right? Like, he's not even getting good press. That's the weird part. Like, the fact that he was being erased from newspapers as not even being responsible for this debacle upsets him. Like, he's just tired of being invisible and like unseen. And at this point, any press is good press for Tom. Like, he's just kind of over it. On top of that, he's still wondering why Shiv didn't tell him about the pregnancy, right? And there's a scene where he's kind of judging her for drinking a bottle, having a glass of wine. And with Tom, it's hard to tell. Does he see this baby as his lifeline or as a chance to reconcile their relationship? Because if this ATN doesn't work out, I mean, that baby's an anchor baby, right? Like, it can secure his future for, years, decades to come. We get to this funeral and pretty much anyone is there. Like, it's just a room full of the world's most important people. But we'll focus on the family to start. So in terms of the family, we finally see Shiv's mother. And they haven't spoken since Italy, right? Like, you can tell the relationship is quite tense. They don't really like her that much, especially Shiv. Because the last time we saw Shiv with her mother was basically telling her that not all women were meant to be mothers. And as soon as Shiv's mother saw her, she knew she was pregnant, right? She could tell right away. She's like, why didn't you tell me? And the fact that she was like, well, I didn't want you to use it against me. It was just kind of ironic because I don't know where they get this trait from stabbing each other in the back, but I was just like, Shiv, you are the last person in the world to be judging your mother. But her mother tries again and again to kind of talk with her, but Shiv just doesn't really want to have it. And again, that relationship is just ice cold. And then there's Greg's raggedy behind. The fact that Greg left Tom to go network for himself just killed me, right? And he's becoming more hungry. Like, the closer he gets to power, the more addicted he's willing to eat like as much as possible to chase this dream, right? To secure whatever future he thinks he's securing, right? He actually has the audacity to ask Roman to give him an intro, let him know that I am part of the crowning committee. And watching Greg near that casket like stressed me out. Like, he was standing front right. He was actually arguing to be there. He's like, Tom gave it to me, and his only job was to watch his uncle. That was it. He had one job and he failed to do it. Problem begins when their uncle gets on stage and makes this speech. And this is a challenge that they very much have to overcome. And the only person that was able to overcome it was Ken. Watching the way Ewan basically forced himself on stage, as much as he tries to separate himself from his brother, they're very much the same, right? Like, he was like, I am getting on that stage, I am making this speech, if you touch me again, I'm gonna throw you down, right? Like, they have the same vibe in terms of I feel like their uncle summarized Logan very well, right? A man that nobody really loved, but they all respected and feared greatly. And we don't get much backstory into Logan or his relationship with his brother. So this speech was important because it gives us some context that we didn't really know. And I do think Ewan did love his brother. I do think his speech basically focused on why Logan was the man that he was. What essentially turned him into this monster. And they have a lot of the same kind of shared trauma, right? He describes, how during the war they came to Canada and the traumatic circumstances that led up to that. It seems like during their childhood they lived with their aunt and uncle who were a bit unstable, and kind of blamed Logan for the death of their sister. And the more he talks about their childhood, like, you kind of understand, Logan is kind of just a closed off, like, he doesn't let anybody in, right? This is not information that he would volunteer freely. And what I gathered from his speech is that Logan was someone who, he exhibits guilt. He was someone that wanted to do better. But somewhere along the way, he just kind of had to do what he had to do to survive. And as a result of that, he was able to kind of build this massive empire. As I'm listening to his brother talk, I just felt like they were kind of two sides of the same coin. And it just felt like a lot of the frustration that Ewan has with his brother is because, he's built this massive empire, right? The problem with Logan is that everybody is in Logan's shadows. And when I think about what he's done, Ewan kind of is the opposite of Logan in terms of, he's given away his wealth to, I think, Greenpeace, if I recall. Now, whether or not he cares about Greenpeace, I'm not so sure. I just felt like it's an act of like, F you, F the family. It was a way of separating himself from his brother that just had this massive influence that, he's unable to reach. And so I think it's a mix of like love and hate. I think he loved his brother. He hated his brother, but he also greatly envied him in a lot of ways. He makes a line saying that, the meagerness of men, like that's what Logan kind of inspired in people. And by this, he means basically the inability or the unwillingness to put yourself in other people's shoes. And because of this lack of empathy for the world around you, it creates this kind of what he called mean estimation of the world, right? This kind of like, you got to take it before they take you energy, right? It's Logan that's created this toxicity, but you guys have to do better. His speech was basically telling the audience, like, you don't got to think like Logan. There's enough pieces for everyone. Like the scarcity mentality where you just have to take. You don't have to do that, like we are the world. And that's how he ends his speech. So, Ewan's speech was very much, it kind of painted a picture of who Logan was as a person, right? It was telling the audience, like, I don't care what this man has accomplished, but you need to remember, like, he was not generous. Yeah, sure, he gave away a few millions of his billions, but, this man had nothing inside him. And Ken kind of flips the script. Right, he focuses on his father's accomplishments and takes a lot of those negative sort of traits or negative characterizations of his father and kind of makes it a symbol and turns his father into like a symbol of strength, right? Only somebody strong could have accomplished all of this. And so before we talk about Ken's speech, Roman has to follow that up. And Roman just choked, right? He really couldn't do it. And their uncle threw down a gauntlet that he was just unable to pick up. And it's hard to know, right? Roman has been practicing this for days now. I think the pressure of it also made it worse. And then listening to his speech, he had stage fright a bit. Like he wasn't even able to really articulate anything before he broke down. And there's a line he says, like, is he in there? Can we get him out? So the idea that he will never see his father again is just now dawning on him. And he just couldn't keep it together, right? Like that was his breakdown. Like he can't keep pretending like he's the strong person that's devoid of emotions anymore, right? Like he's just tired. Shiv's and Jerry's reaction, like if you look at the audience, right? Like some people were judging Roman. Jerry looked like she wanted to run up and hug him, right? Like she felt really bad for him. Like she could see his crown slipping away, and she was just like, damn, like you really fumbled that. And I really believed that tonight would have been Roman's night. I figured if he was going to explode, it was going to be the opposite. Like he was going to say crazy things about it. Like I knew he was going to break down, but I didn't know how he was going to break down. And again, watching Roman, the lead up to this speech, he seemed fine. right? Even confident, right? He approached Frank about potentially becoming the only CEO. He was rounding up a posse. He was cutting deals. Like, he was being very chill. Like, I don't know. He seemed okay, to be honest. So Roman kind of opens up a door because the only person that was planned to speak was Roman, right? The uncle wasn't supposed to speak. Shiv wasn't supposed to speak. Kendall definitely wasn't supposed to speak. It just felt like, watching Ken and Shiv, like they were trying to pitch themselves. It just became this thing where it's like, let me just get my 2 cents in. But the only person who came off, the person who won was Ken. Like, the way Ken walked into that funeral and the way he walked out, that was 2 different Kens. And so Ken's speech was perfect. And I think a lot of the reason why it was well done is because, Ken, we know how Ken does when he's in front of people. He gets performance anxiety. He cripples under the weight of his own narcissism. Like, he doesn't do well in front of people, but because it was unplanned and because it was just kind of on the whim, he didn't really have time to think. So I think that helped him in part. The thing that Ken does well is that he focuses on his father's accomplishments, and he does acknowledge that he was a brute. Like, he doesn't try to make it seem like his father was some wonderful, fairy godfather. Like, he was just like, yeah, he was a brute, but you had to be to accomplish half the things that he's accomplished in life. I really liked how this speech was shot, like the different angles, right? They got Kenny from below. They got Ken, like, it was basically his ascension. He's finally rising to his potential. He's finally becoming the man that his father really wanted him to become, but didn't live long enough to ever even conceive that he could become. Like, as far as Logan was concerned, his kids were a write-off. They were just a tax write-off. Like, there was just nothing to them. But today, Kendall, like, he rose up. And he directly countered a lot of the things his uncle was saying, specifically this meagerness in men, right? He actually says it's a good thing, right? This meagerness that he's being attacked for is actually the competition, the drive, the desire, the fact that his father has accomplished so much and was such a strong man, has inspired other people to create, to build, to trade, right? Like, this meagerness you're speaking of is what built this country. And then he takes a direct shot and says, I hope to become like him. Like, he's my father, and I can only hope to rise to such greatness. I think one of the best lines in Kendall's speech was the fact he said something about how his father was comfortable in any room he went into, right? He could go anywhere and he could make it his. And this attitude to me was basically saying, which is why I think Jared liked the speech, is like, you need to take what's yours. Like, if you want it, take it, right? Like, there should be no room that's locked or unavailable to you. Right? No safe spaces, right? Like, anywhere he went, he felt safe, right? Why? Because he could take it at any moment. So Kenny's speech saved the day. And I love how when he came down, like, he just refused to look at Ewan. Like, he just did not look at him. And his uncle was raging. Like, he looked at him like, he knew he manipulated the situation. He just like, damn, like, you really are your father's son. And at this point, Ken doesn't have time. Right? He's done convincing people to stay with him. He's done convincing people to be with him. You either with him or you're against him, and he doesn't have time for that. And after his speech, Shiv comes on. And I felt Shiv's speech was a bit impulsive. Like, she just felt like she had something to say. It didn't have anywhere near the impact that Kendall's speech had. Like, half of this room couldn't really fit a whole woman into their head. So, I like that she pointed out her father's misogyny. As if to say, like, I was, he overlooked me, but I loved him. And, her speech started off really good, right? She kind of, makes it known that even as children, they were really afraid of him. And one of the things that she says is that she couldn't conceive of all the things that he was doing in that room, all the things that they were disturbing him, from doing. And the other thing they really couldn't conceive is how evil he was, right? And all the bad things, like, how bad was Logan? How bad was Dad? Like, he was pretty bad, and I think the magnitude of him is they're only now kind of coming to terms with, right? Like, Shiv just sees him as her father, but she kind of has to separate her father from the man that he was. And as much as she loved him, you know, he never saw her as a successor, and she knows that. So the audience reaction was mixed, right? There were people that were crying for him, like Colin and Roman. There were other people who were crying for themselves, like Lukas. Like Lukas did not like Ken's speech. Like he looked like kind of annoyed and bothered. Jared was like, that was a great speech. Like, I'm gonna talk to you later. Like you really did the thing, you know? Like watching people kind of weigh out what this all means was really interesting. So now we get to post-funeral Ken. And so it's like a switch has flipped. But at this point, Roman is done. Shiv is just she doesn't really know what to do. You know, she's still hanging on to Lukas. But Kendall just, he turns into the Godfather, right? Especially when he found out that Shiv was trying to become CEO. And I love the score change when Ken is like going into boss mode, right? Like he just became a totally different Ken, in my opinion. And in one speech, you know, Ken was able to turn the tables, right? He didn't know how he was going to gain the influence that he was going to gain, but you know, it seems like he took Jared away from Roman, and he's starting to build a team, right? He's starting to be very active. You know, he's starting to tell people like, listen, you're going to work for me and that's it. And I think he's feeling very alone. Like there's a scene before he goes into this funeral where Jess leaves him, right? His longtime assistant. And the reason she leaves him, of course, is because of, you know, this whole election situation. And, you know, he kind of went into that funeral totally alone, right? He didn't know, like, he's just like, I don't know what else I can do. And the thing is, he's sacrificed a lot, right? He's kind of compromised himself for someone that he doesn't like, he doesn't believe in. And so it better pay off, right? And now he's done hoping, right? He's not going to take Roman's word. He's going to make it happen, right? Like he's kind of decided after that funeral that all this will definitely be for something, one way or another. So Ken rallies the troops. You know, he gets Hugo on his side, who he already has. And he tells him, like, you're going to be my dog. That's it. He grabs Colin, right? And I thought it was interesting that he knew that Colin had been speaking to a psychiatrist. You know, it tells me that Kendall kind of has been thinking about people, but is now actively trying to now he's trying to form the team, right? Final call. And in terms of Lukas, like, I'm not sure how real this information is, right? Because it's Ebba that tells Hugo that Shiv is thinking of who wants to be CEO. So I think Lucas's strategy is to get the siblings to fight so they look incompetent, so that he can become CEO. Because at this point, all these leaks, it doesn't really make any sense. So we get to this post-funeral after party, I guess you could say. And, you know, Ken is starting to recruit people. He's trying to get a solid foundation. And he's being very direct. He goes up to Jared, and this conversation with Jared, like, this was the moment where Ken realized, okay, I'm done. Like, I have to be the only CEO. Because this conversation made him realize that Roman may have oversold Jared's dedication to them, right? Roman made it seem like Jared would back them 100% explicitly, but apparently it wasn't made as explicit as Roman made it seem, right? It seems like Roman oversold Jared quite a bit, right? Like we hear that even Connor's offer of being a diplomat, like that package wasn't as great as Roman made it seem, right? Like Connor was complaining about travel budgets, like he thought he was going to be treated like a king. So it seems like Roman kind of, you know, edited some things out. Ken literally approaches Jared and he's like, okay, so when are we going to go after these guys? Big Four, and when are you going to start, you know, talking about this issue? And Jared's like, well, you know, it's out of my hands. And he's like, what do you mean? I thought you said you would help. And Jared's like, I said I would try to help. Right? He kind of gives him that swirl, right? And the way Jared was talking to Kendall, like first he made it clear that he knew he was going to win. Like he seemed very confident that his presidency was secured. And second, his attitude seems to be like, well, we're in bed together. So it doesn't really matter what I do because you have to support me, right? Like, so it really felt like Jared played Roman, right? It just, that was the moment where Ken realized, like, damn, you used us. And not only did you use us, like, we don't really have anything to force you to do what it is we want you to do. Ken's whole vibe changes, right? Like, he already doesn't like this man. And then he finds it hard to even hide it, right? There's a scene when Roman comes in, tells Greg to F off. And, you know, Jared starts going in on Roman, being like, you know, tiny tears, like, you really messed up. Like, I thought you were the man, but it seems like your brother's the man. And Kendall was like, hey, you know, take it easy today. And the way he was looking at Jared when he said that, like, he looked like you piece of like, I don't know how, but I'm gonna get you. You know, like, I don't know when, I don't know where, but I'm gonna massacre you. Like, he was not having it with Jared. The only saving grace for Ken is Shiv is also a terrible, like, she also doesn't like him very much. So basically everybody is trying to make a deal with this man and get what they want. And this conversation with Shiv, Lukas, and Jared was the most awkward conversation in the world, because Lukas doesn't speak well, right? In my opinion, like, he's very, I don't know, he comes off pretentious. He's not really, he couldn't really connect with this guy. On top of that, Shiv wasn't really doing a good job like middlemaning, right? And there's a few parts of this scene where you could tell Lukas was so annoyed with Shiv, right? Like, Shiv just refused to give him any leeway, right? She looked annoyed by Jared's presence. She didn't even pretend to want to support him. Jared's whole thing is that he actually believes a lot of the things that he says, right? He respects Logan's ideology. And I think by that he means he respects Logan's sort of attitude of doing what you want when you want it, right? He's kind of taking from their father's playbook, right? He's not a puppet. Like, Jared doesn't give me the vibe that he's a puppet, right? Like, he can be a control puppet, but I don't think any of these people have the ability to control him. And he just looked really annoyed with Lukas, right? Lukas was promising, you know, cultural domination. Like, we're going to make you look good. Like, you know, I don't even have to be in it. We can have an American CEO. And as soon as Jared heard American CEO and saw Shiv, he was like, I ain't negotiating with no more. Like, he's not negotiating with a woman. Like, if he was willing to even look into that, it definitely would not be Shiv. I think towards the end of the episode, when Lukas called her back to say, I think I can make an American CEO work, I don't think he meant her. I think he meant, I found somebody else, but thank you for the idea. Because there's no way these men are negotiating with a female. Like, I'm sorry to say, like, it's just a very man-dominated sphere, and, you know, it's just not, there's no infiltrating this. Even though Logan has lost a lot of influence in the last few days, he's very much still respected. And the idea of him and all the things that he's accomplished is the only thing that's giving these kids some leverage, right? They still have some momentum from their father's death. People still want to see what they're about. They still have some time to, like, prove themselves. And it's at this moment that, you know, again, by the end of the episode, Ken basically decides he's going to save the family on his own. He sits Roman down and he said, you effed it up. You know, and when he said that, I actually felt really bad for Roman. I was like, damn, like, you're going to say that to, even Roman was like, damn, like, you're really going to come after me today out of all the days? He was basically saying, listen, you oversold it. You're no better than Shiv. I have a plan and you need to stick to the plan. And Ken just kind of realized at that moment that they were puppets, right? And he didn't appreciate being a puppet, let alone to a man that he didn't fully respect. And the way he talks to Roman, right, he puts him in his place. Like, he's not even trying to negotiate with him. He's not even trying to be like, listen, what should we do? There's no we anymore. You're going to do what I say because you suck at your job, and I'm just going to take over. And Roman just looks so defeated, right? Like, he does not have the skin for this. He's exhausted. He doesn't have any energy left in him. I thought at the end when Roman went onto the street that he was going to get stabbed. I thought he was going to, you know, I thought something bad was going to happen, but I think the reason he went out there is because he wanted to feel something, right? His father used to always hit him. Like, he's used to being a punching bag, and I think that's what he thinks he deserves. You know, like, he just sees himself as just for the streets, right? He wants to be punished. And so he was just starting fights with people, that he wasn't able to finish. And he gets his butt kicked, right? And I think he's just so tired. And he just wants to feel something. And this was the only way. But I really thought at the end he was going to get shanked or something. I thought, oh my God, this is like something crazy is going to happen here. And the thing with Roman is that his father is dead and the world is falling apart, right? Like Roman's world begins and ends with Logan, right? Like he is, like Logan created the world as far as Roman is concerned. And now that he's not here, who's going to save us, right? And that's his attitude, right? He's yelling at the protesters like, you peasants, you have no idea what's coming. He's just lost. He's not able to get on. He's not able to rise from this. And so that was a great episode. I do think Ken is going to somehow take over. My theory is that he's going to take over with the help of the siblings. But in the end, there will be, one head, one crown. And I think he is the only crown, the only head available. Because to be honest, the rest of them don't know what they're doing. So you guys let me know what you're thinking.